became really the main message coming out of last night. I guess maybe first I need to ask, are you sure you have your press credentials after his speech last night, Maggie?
He seemed not certain whether he was banning. He seemed to still be thinking about it.
He was thinking, he's mulling it over. But getting to your reporting, fascinating reporting that Donald Trump took particular exception with, and kind of the attempts to have the man pivot and the man that they're dealing with now.
There's an enormous amount of frustration. This was a story that my colleague Alex Burns and I spent a lot of time on. There is an enormous amount of frustration by people close to the campaign, in the campaign, around the candidate, who see basically, you know, it get announced every couple of days. There's going to be this new version of him this week where he's going to do a speech and he's going to read off a teleprompter. And that's going to be the bar that's now set for how he's going to be doing better. And that is not what his instinct is. His instinct is to do, you know, what we just saw last night from that video. And there's sort of a Groundhog Day aspect to this, of we do this and then we do this all over again. So our story began with a meeting about the need for him to really get in gear about this and focus on a teleprompter and give more sort of targeted events on June 20th, the day that he fired his campaign manager. There was another meeting similar to the need for change in tone and comportment that was held just this past week, right before his Second Amendment comments from a rally that became very controversial. What we saw last night, too, at the rally is that Trump says, to Errol's point about, you know, people can see it for themselves, Trump says they've quoted 3 people, it's all anonymous sources. We had 5 people on the record, including one of them, the former partner of his top advisor. But Trump has been very effective at structuring the narrative how he wants to. It's much harder to do that in a general election.
And the people you're talking to, though, are they getting to the point of finally giving up on the idea there will be a pivot?
They are approaching the point where they're not sure how coachable he is. I mean, he can get to a certain point, and then after that, it's very, very hard for him. Look, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anxiety, and there's also a lot of the fact that the candidate himself is very upset and is lashing out. Candidates very rarely tend to blame themselves. This is not just unique to Trump, but it might be more pronounced with him.
That's a good point. Also, kind of maybe it dovetails into Maggie's reporting, is this new tone this week. For the first time, acknowledging or at least setting a bar of, I might not win, I might actually lose. And the comment in the interview about, it's okay, I'll just take a very, very long vacation. What do you think's behind that, Phil?
Well, tracking with a lot of reporters who are planning very, very long vacations after the election at some point, I think. No, look, I think that there is, for the first time, a recognition when he's looking at the poll numbers, which were the basis for so much of his remarks throughout the primary, when he's looking at kind of the mechanics of how campaigns work, when he's watching what's going on around him, not attacks from Democrats, not attacks from the media, attacks from inside his own party, that, man, this isn't that fun, A, and B, this is a very complicated process. And I think that's something that I took out of Maggie and Alex's reporting more than anything else, is that campaigns are hard. The process of campaigning is difficult. The process of running a campaign is extraordinarily difficult. And you sense that there's a lot of frustration, a lot of, man, I didn't know this was what it was all about. You're struck consistently by, when you talk to his senior advisors, they're actually relatively unified, and they believe that there's a path forward, there's a message forward, there are serious opportunities for Donald Trump going forward. It's his inability to kind of follow that pathway that breeds a lot of the frustration. And I think you're seeing his frustration when he makes comments like that.
And the inability, maybe kind of coming off of that frustration, Donald Trump, instead of taking the message that his advisors want and push that message forward, he is now taking on this message that the election is already rigged. He pushed that message last night in Pennsylvania, about Pennsylvania. Let's show for our viewers.
Call up law enforcement, and we have to have the sheriffs and the police chiefs and everybody watching. Because if we get cheated out of this election, if we get cheated out of a win in Pennsylvania, which is such a vital state, especially when I know what's happening here, folks. I know she can't beat what's happening here. The only way they can beat it, in my opinion, and I mean this 100%, if in certain sections of the state they cheat.
And the campaign now, MJ, they're asking people to sign up on the website to be election monitors, to look for fraud. What are they going to use these email lists for? What do you take from it?
Well, one thing that I thought was really striking, Maggie, in your story with Alex, was that we're 3 months out from Election Day, and we're seeing this portrait of a campaign in total despair, and a candidate that is very frustrated, not to mention the aides that are around him. It's very unusual to see a story like this so far out from Election Day. And I think Donald Trump, as we've seen over and over again throughout this election, he is someone that likes to take things to the extreme and really sort of test how far he can take things. The problem for him, though, is that at this point in the election, voters really want to be convinced that he's a serious candidate. And we have anecdotal evidence of this kind of thing really hurting him. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a Clinton rally, and there was a Republican voter who voted for Donald Trump in the primaries, and now he is supporting Hillary Clinton. And he told me that the turning point for him when he changed his mind was when Donald Trump made the comment about how Russians should hack into Hillary Clinton's email, and then went on to say that he was being sarcastic. And this person said, look, I don't think this is the kind of thing that any candidate running for president should be sarcastic about or should be joking about.
On this issue, though, that Donald Trump kind of laying the groundwork that this election is rigged, I find it striking that while you're asking people to sign up to be an election monitor, to look for fraud on your website, why aren't you asking them to sign up to get out the vote? I wonder, to me, that strikes me as, is he trying to manage expectations or set the bar for, this is who I can blame if I lose?
I mean, there are a lot of people, I think, who came away with the impression that that's certainly what he is looking for is a way to say that if this does not go as planned, I mean, he's actually not looking for, he did say it very openly.
Right.
But you are correct that there are Republicans who are watching this and saying, why would you be spending this much energy on this? And to be clear, having poll watchers is not unusual. This is done in lots of campaigns. The question that arose about his doing it is there is an RNC consent decree about how exactly this can be done and whether this would work. And his campaign is not the RNC, but why are you not also trying to open up a number of field offices? Why have you not been doing that all along? Why are you not trying to develop a targeted data program? Why are you not trying to make sure that you have, sort of a specific message to the media point about the things that he's complaining about and about it being, rigged? He is, at the end of the day, really just bringing the focus back onto himself over and over and over. The media is out to get me. The polls are rigged and cheating me. Voters vote on the economy, they vote on terrorism, national security concerns, but they vote on what are issues for their own lives. And Donald Trump's treatment is not, other than for his hardest fans, probably not among them for persuadable voters.
He has a media problem. It may not be the one that he thinks it is. He has a paid media problem, right? So CNN reporting that since the end of the primary season, the Clinton campaign has spent close to $43 million on ads. The Trump campaign has spent zero. Now, if you pass up all of these opportunities to have a carefully crafted, targeted message that you can send over and over again to the people who you most need to get it to, if you pass on that opportunity, the numbers are going to go against you in the polls. The morale in your campaign is going to fall apart. I mean, he's really sort of reaping what he sowed, and if he can get that part of it back on track, he'll have a chance to get back in.